Hi friends, let's begin with the MCQs as we do every day. So the first is the patient presented with diplopia or casualty. On examination, the left pupil was dilated. Both direct and consignable light reflex were lost in the affected eye. So what is the most probable diagnosis? Okay, see the question, it's a very simple question. The question is like it's a patient who comes to you with a diplopia. It's an ophthalmic question basically. So a patient who comes to you with a diplopia to the casualty, so you examine the patient. So when you examine a patient with diplopia, the left pupil was dilated. So you see a dilated left pupil, and when you do both direct and consanguine light reflex, it was lost in the affected eye. That is on the left pupil, it was absent. So what is the most probable diagnosis? So the options are basically second nerve palsy, third nerve palsy, fifth and seventh nerve palsy. Basically, the key point here is it's like both direct and consanguine light reflex are lost in the affected eye. So that's a very key point here which you have to remember. Based on that, you can just tell the answer here. So for the last time I will repeat, it's a patient with diplopia. Examination, left pupil was dilated and both direct and consanguine light reflex were lost in the affected eye. So what is the diagnosis? It's a second nerve palsy, third nerve, fifth nerve, or the seventh nerve palsy. So the answer is really it's a third nerve palsy. Third nerve, you know, it's a oculomotor nerve palsy. So why is third nerve? See, basically you can have two differential diagnoses here. You can have an optic nerve also. They haven't given the optic nerve here, but yeah, really two differential diagnoses in this condition. It can be optic nerve palsy also, it can be oculomotor palsy also. But in this case, it's oculomotor palsy. Why? Because see, both direct and consanguine light reflex are absent. If they just say you that there is a direct reflex absent and that too consanguine in the opposite eye, it will be a optic nerve injury. So but no, the question is both direct and consanguine nerve light reflex are absent. So yeah, the answer is oculomotor nerve palsy. So yeah, it's a afferent nerve fiber, that is a optic nerve, and we have the efferent nerve fiber, that is the oculomotor nerve, which is bilaterally affected. So yeah, and in second nerve palsy, that I told, in the optic nerve palsy there will be a loss of direct reflex in the affected eye and loss of consanguine light reflex in the opposite eye. So yeah, moving on to the next question. It's a very easy question. So which of the following is the drug of choice for cyanide toxicity? So if you have a patient who comes with a cyanide toxicity, so what is the drug of choice? Options are amyl nitrite, sodium nitrite, dicobalt EDTA, or it's a hydroxycobalamin. So yeah, it's a very easy question, but if you can just remember, if you know the answer. So I will just repeat, which of the following is the drug of choice for cyanide toxicity? So if you have a patient with cyanide toxicity, what is the drug of choice? It's amyl nitrite, sodium nitrite, dicobalt EDTA, or it's a hydroxycobalamin. So yeah, if you want to answer this, anyone wants to answer this, it's a drug of choice for cyanide toxicity. So yeah, I'll just tell the answer here. The answer is D, that it's a hydroxycobalamin is the drug of choice for cyanide toxicity. See, if one more you have, it's like a sodium thiosulfate here. With soda, you have to give sodium thiosulfate with hydroxycobalamin in case of a cyanide toxicity. So yeah, if you don't have hydroxycobalamin, then you can give amyl nitrate or sodium nitrate. But yeah, drug of choice, you have to remember, it's a hydroxycobalamin. It's the drug of choice with sodium thiosulfate. Next we move on. Yeah, it's also easy one. Gestational hypertension is defined as it's a BP greater than 130/80 after 22 weeks of gestation, or BP greater than 130/80 after 20 weeks, or BP greater than 40/90 after 22, or it's the BP greater than 140/90 after 20 weeks of gestation. So see, I know the answer, you might be also knowing the answer, just guess if you want. It's a gestational hypertension. So it's 130/80, no, it's not 130/90. So basically it's a gestational hypertension. So the question is, gestational hypertension is defined as what? So they are asking for the range of BP here. And you know what is the answer? The answer is D here. D basically it's greater than 140/90, that to 20 weeks of gestation. So there might be confusion between 22 and 20, but the answer is 20 weeks of gestation. It is BP greater than 140/90. So yeah. In case of preeclampsia and all, it's there. In chronic hypertension also, it's before 20 weeks. But yeah, in normal it is gestational hypertension, it will be after 20 weeks. And yeah, Next we have what is the percentage of cytosine in DNA if the percentage of thymine residue is 28%. Yeah, it's 11-12 question, not but it can be given in the NEET also. But yeah, it is what is the percentage of cytosine in DNA if the percentage of thymine is 28%. The options are 22, 28, 36 or 44. See, you remember in class 11-12 we did this, it was like 80 GC. Yeah, it was like 80 GC. That is, A was adenine, thymine will be equal, and what they are asking, cytosine they are asking. So basically it's like 28 plus 28, it will be how much it is. Maths is weak, but yeah, it will be basically 48 and yeah 56. So remaining will be how much? It will be 100 minus 56, that is 44. So yeah, the answer will be 22. What I think, yeah, 22 is the right answer. So yeah, basically they are asking 80 GC. You know, it's in DNA we have 80 and GC. So yeah, thymine was given 28. So in that case we calculated and it was cytosine we have 22% in this case. So yeah, just remember. Okay, next we have hernia with hydrocele is known as. It's also a typical question which we ask. I'll just repeat. It's a hernia with hydrocele is known as what? It's a Gibbons hernia, Buerger's hernia, Bettlard's hernia, or it's a Ogilvie hernia. So yeah, if you know the name, you can just tell. Hernia with hydrocele is known as Gibbons, Buerger's, Bettlard's, or it's a Ogilvie hernia. So yeah, anyone wants to answer this? It's a hernia with hydrocele. Because just tell the names and the hernias. See, I will tell the answer in the last. See, in case of a Buerger's hernia is what? It's basically a hernia into a pouch of Douglas. If it is a pouch of Douglas, it is Buerger's hernia. Then we have Bettlard's hernia. Bettard is basically it's a femoral hernia. That to through opening in the saphenous vein, we have a Bettlard's hernia. Buerger, I told, it's a pouch of Douglas. And we have the Ogilvie's hernia, which is basically it's a hernia through a defect in the conjoint tendon just lateral to where it encircles the rectus sheath. Basically, it's a Ogilvie hernia is in the defect in the conjoint tendon. So yeah, the answer is A in this condition. So basically, you have to remember whenever there is a hernia and that too with the hydrocele, it's called as Gibbons hernia. So yeah, it's the name given to the hernia, but yeah, it's a Gibbons hernia with hernia with hydrocele. And Buerger's is pouch of Douglas. Bettlard's I told it's a femoral hernia, and Ogilvie I told it's a defect in the conjoint tendon. Next we move on. It's by calculating which of the following can we obtain the central value of a sample with 180 elements. It's a PSM question, but yeah, if you know, it's a 98th percentile, second decline, 9th decline, or it's a second quartile. I also don't know this, but yeah, if you know it, just tell me the answer. By calculating which of the following can we obtain the central value of a sample with 180 elements. It's a 98th percentile, second decline, 9th decline, or it's a second quartile. So I also don't know, but yeah, if you know the answer, just tell me. Okay, basically the answer they have given is D, that is the second quartile is the right answer, which has a 180 elements. So yeah, it gives the central value of 180 elements, and that to the central value of a distribution is given by the median. So we divide distribution into 1:1. See, in PSM I am also very weak, but yeah, you have to remember it will come. So it's the second quartile that will have a central line of 180 elements. So in quartile, basically quartile, you know, quartile is basically 4. Quartile meaning is only 4. So yeah, in quartile elements of distribution are divided into 4 equal parts by 3 values. So yeah, it's each part contains a quarter, that is a 25%. So yeah, moving on to the next question. Next we have it's a 55-year-old lady who comes here with a 3rd degree uterine prolapse. So which of the following is the best management for her? So yeah, it's a OB question. It's also very simple. I'll just put it's a 55-year-old lady who comes here with a 3rd degree prolapse, uterine prolapse. So which of the following is the best management? So you will give a Fothergill repair, sling operation, vaginal hysterectomy with pelvic floor repair, or it's a Sirotkar's procedure. I'll just repeat. It's a Fothergill repair, sling operation, vaginal hysterectomy with pelvic floor repair, or it's a Sirotkar's procedure. Anyone want to answer this? 3rd degree. 3rd degree is when you know it's. So what I think is I am right in this. But yeah, if you want to know, it's okay. The answer is C. That it's basically 3rd degree. It's a 3rd degree. You can just there will be division, but they haven't given. Okay, so it's from 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. What I remember is till 4th, I think. but yeah, it's a third degree, that it has already come, the uterus has already come out of the vulva. So yeah, in this case what you do, see the right answer, we have the vaginal hysterectomy with pelvic floor repair, because it's outside the area, that's why. And the recommended criteria for this is greater than 40 years, have completed their families, and do not wish to persevere menstrual and childbearing function. So yeah, it's a vaginal hysterectomy with a pelvic floor repair in case of a third degree. And I have to see the age also, it's 55 years old, so it's already completed the family. So yeah, if you have a nulliparous or it's a congenital prolapse, you will give a abdominal sling operation. And if you are in a pregnancy and postnatal period, you will do a ring pessary, because you cannot do surgery at that time. So that time you will do a ring pessary, you will put inside, and it will basically reduce the prolapse. And less than 40 years, you can do further repair and Sirocco procedure. And greater than 40 years and completed the family, you will do what I told you, it's a vaginal hysterectomy with a pelvic floor repair. And greater than 60 years, she is not unfit for surgery only. So greater than 60 years, what you will do, we have two things, that is colpothlesis and the left foot repair. These are done if the patient doesn't want to return the sexual function. So yeah, it's greater than 60, it is left foot repair and colpothlesis. So you have to remember the names here. So next we move on. Which among the following patient with AML, you know, it's acute myeloid leukemia, has a good prognosis? So you have to tell which of the patient with AML have a good prognosis. So yeah, it's the options are, it's a 56-year-old patient who developed post chemotherapy AML. Next option we have, it's an infant with AML having complex karyotype, a 60-year-old patient diagnosed with AML M0 type, or a patient with AML having inversion cystine. So yeah, if you can just tell me the answer here. So yeah, which of the following patient with AML has a good prognosis? So yeah, the answer is very simple, it's a patient with AML having inversion cystine. So you should know it is what is inversion cystine. Inversion cystine basically it's a good prognosis factor for AML. And yeah, another option are not that good, what to say in this, but yeah, it's a good prognosis factor, we have only inversion cystine. So yeah, next question we have, it's what is the most commonly used complete remission induction regimen in patient with AML? They also the same hematology question. I will repeat, what is the most commonly used complete remission induction regimen in patient with AML? So yeah, the options are very simple. It's all trans retinoic acid and arsenic trioxide. It's an L-asparagines. It's cytarabine with anthracyclines, or the last option, which is last option is cytarabine with alkalizing agent. So yeah, one is the request to be on your live video, but yeah, what will you do in coming live video? Okay, next the question was very simple. The question was, what is the most commonly used complete remission induction regimen in patients with AML? Options are all trans retinoic acid and arsenic toxicity. It's L-asparagines. It's cytarabine with anthracyclines, or it's a cytarabine with alkalizing agents. So you have to remember, there is nothing like, it's a factual question. So yeah, the regimen is cytarabine with anthracycline. That you have to remember. It's a cytarabine with anthracycline that is a regimen that is for complete remission of a patient with AML. So yeah. Okay. I will just tell you the treatment. If you treatment for that, it's an induction of chemotherapy, that is 7+C regimen, and we have a post-remission therapy with a high dose cytarabine and hematopoietic cell treatment for complete remission. So yeah, induction chemotherapy is cytarabine and danuglipron for 1 to 3. So yeah, next we move on to the next question. Next question we have, it's first year pathology resident. Again, it's a pathology only, but yeah, it's prepare the following smear from a patient's blood sample. So which of the following is suggestive of? Basically, I will just tell you that pathological image. From there you can just tell me the answer. So yeah, okay, it's okay, and there is the RBCs are there, but there is no central pallor in this condition. So no central pallor in the RBCs, and it is called as spherocytes. So yeah, so they have given the peripheral smear, it is spherocytes in this condition. So they appear due to decreased membrane surface area and are seen in following conditions. So your options are thalassemia, autoimmune hemolysis, iron deficiency anemia, and lead poisoning. So if you want to answer this, basically it's RBCs are there, but in the RBCs there is no central pallor, and that too it is spherocytes. Just remember the image is having spherocytes. So if a pathological image has spherocytes, so what is the following is suggestive of. Diagnosis you have to tell basically. It's a thalassemia, and then we have autoimmune hemolysis, iron deficiency anemia, or it's lead poisoning. So yeah, if you can tell. So in which of the following spherocytes can be seen? Thalassemia, autoimmune hemolysis, iron deficiency anemia, or it's lead poisoning. So I'll just say it's I'm just repeating again the question. The answer is autoimmune hemolysis, in which basically central pallor won't be there. They appear due to decreased membrane surface area and seen in the following condition. So I'll just tell the names in which the central pallor is not there. The options, the criteria is it's a autoimmune hemolysis, hemolytic anemia, it's a hereditary spherocytosis, it's a clostridial sepsis, or it's a snake bites. So yeah, these are the only 4 conditions in which central pallor won't be there in the RBCs. I will just repeat, it's a autoimmune hemolytic anemia, hereditary spherocytosis, clostridial sepsis, or it's a snake bite. Next we move on. In children aged 1 month to 1 year, all of the following are common causes of mortality except it's a tetanus, malnutrition, diarrheal disease, or it's a acute respiratory infection. So yeah, if you can tell. In children aged 1 month to 1 year, all of the following are common causes of mortality except tetanus, malnutrition, diarrheal disease, or it's a acute respiratory infection. Most common cause of mortality except. So yeah, so the answer is very simple. See, most common cause of mortality in case of neonates, that is from the 1 month to the 1 year. The most common cause, it's malnutrition and all that, but yeah, exception we have tetanus. Tetanus we don't find in the case of mortality in the neonates. So yeah, malnutrition, diarrheal disease, and acute respiratory infections are there for the mortality in neonate. Next we move on. It's a thalamic lesion. Thalamic lesions are used to elevate Parkinson's disease in cases that are refractory to L-DOPA. So what thalamic nucleus is the stereotactic target for the neurosurgeons? It's a centromedian, ventrolateral, ventroposterolateral, or it's a ventromedial. So I will just repeat the question. The thalamic lesion are used to elevate Parkinson's disease in cases that are refractory to L-DOPA. So what thalamic nucleus is stereotactic target for a neurosurgeon? So it's a patient with Parkinson and it's refractory to L-DOPA. So what thalamic nucleus is the stereotactic target for the neurosurgeons? Options are centromedian, ventrolateral, ventroposterolateral, or it's a ventromedial. So yeah, the answer is very simple, but yeah, if you know the answer, you can answer. See, it's a ventrolateral and ventroanterior. Whenever you have a Parkinson's disease and it is refractory, L-DOPA doesn't work, so you have to do a surgery for that, thalamic surgery. So in that thalamic surgery, what we see, it's a ventrolateral and anterior thalamus you will target basically for that. So next we have, you are a second year anesthetic PG on call. So you are placed on basically you are in a COVID ICU. A 50-year-old patient who was on non-invasive ventilation is desaturating rapidly. The anesthetist instructs you to intubate the patient with an endotracheal tube. So what is the most commonly used laryngoscopic blade for this procedure? It's a Miller, McIntosh, Viscon, or it's a Magil. So yeah, if you know anesthesia, it is very simple to answer. I'll just repeat. It's a 50-year-old patient during COVID ICU and you are being told to do a endotracheal intubation. So what is the most commonly used laryngoscope blade for this procedure? It's a Miller's, McIntosh, Wisconsin, or it's a Magil. So yeah, it's a McIntosh. McIntosh is the right answer. So yeah, it's a very commonly used laryngoscope blade for endotracheal tube in adults. And yeah, next we move on. Dinesh is there. He's a 2-year-old boy presented with a painful left ankle swelling, and while it's a painful left ankle swelling and difficulty in walking. So in the past he had presented with significant hematomas at immunization sites. So on investigation he was found to have hemophilia A. So what is the treatment of choice in this condition? So I will repeat, it's a 2-year-old boy. It's a 2-year-old boy who comes with a painful left ankle swelling and difficulty walking. In the past, he had presented with significant hematomas at the immunization sites. On investigation, he was found to have hemophilia A. So what is the treatment of choice for this condition? It's a cryoprecipitated fresh frozen plasma, it's a prothrombin complex concentrates, or it's a factor VIII concentrates. So yeah, it's a simple question, but yeah, if you know, I'll just repeat the question. It's a 2-year-old boy who comes to you with a painful left ankle swelling and difficulty in walking. So in the past, he had presented with significant hematomas at the immunization sites. So on investigation, he was found to have hemophilia A. So basically, what is the treatment of choice in this condition? So you have to think of the diagnosis first. They have already given diagnosis is hemophilia A. So what is the treatment of choice for hemophilia A? Options are cryoprecipitated fresh frozen plasma, prothrombin complex concentrate, or it's a factor VIII concentrate. So it's a easy question, but yeah, if you can just tell. Okay, I will tell the answer. Its answer is very simple. For hemophilia, the drug of choice it is the factor VIII concentrate we give for hemophilia A. So because it's a deficiency of factor VIII only, that's why. So cryoprecipitated can be used when factor concentrates are not available. Next we move on. While administering which of the following drugs will you counsel patients regarding transient visual and auditory hallucination? It's a psychiatric question basically, but yeah, it's a adverse effect of a drug which I will tell, and the options are it's oral voriconazole, intravenous voriconazole, oral itaconazole, or it's a intravenous itaconazole. It's actually itaconazole and voriconazole, oral and IV. So you have to tell which of this drug will cause the patient to have a transient visual and auditory hallucination. So yeah, if you know the answer. Okay, the answer is very simple. The answer is it's a intravenous voriconazole, and we see a transient hallucination as well as visual hallucination. Auditory and visual hallucination we see with a patient with intravenous voriconazole. So yeah. Next we have it's a question we have. It's a 68-year-old man who comes to you with a hesitancy, incomplete voiding, and pelvic pain. So on digital rectal examination, an irregularly enlarged prostate with a nodular surface was felt. So transrectal biopsy you do, and it revealed poorly formed glands arranged in a cribriform pattern. So yeah, cribriform pattern is very specific for some condition. And according to the modified lesion score, how would you classify the pattern? So if you have to classify the lesion in terms of lesion pattern, it's a pattern 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, I know it will be very difficult for you to tell, but I will just tell you what are the lesions pattern. So yeah, lesion scoring is for prostate cancer. Yeah, it's for prostate cancer, and all cribriform patterns are defined in the pattern 4. So yeah, I told you it's a pattern. It's a feature for something. If you have a cribriform pattern, it is for lesions pattern 4. So yeah. So I'll just tell you the scoring system. If you have a 1 and 2, it's no longer defined, and you have a 3, it is well formed glands, 4 is poorly formed, and 5th is a sheets of tumor individual cells cords. So yeah, we have a lesion patterns. We have a lesion score also, that is from 2 to 5, no longer assigned, but yeah, grade group is also there. So we have a lesion pattern which I was talking, and lesion pattern 4 is of a cribriform pattern. Next we have we have a patient who was diagnosed with ADP-KD, was prescribed tolvaptan. So after few weeks he presented with dry mouth and increased thirst. What is the likely cause? So it's an increased free water clearance, V2 receptor agonism, increased renal CAMP levels, or it's an increase in urine osmolarity. So the question is very simple, but yeah, you have to remember it. I will just repeat the question. The question was a patient was diagnosed with ADP-KD and was prescribed tolvaptan. After a few weeks, he presented with dry mouth and increased thirst. So what is the likely cause for this? It's an increased free water clearance, V2 receptor agonism, it's an increased renal CAMP levels, or the last one is it's an increase in urine osmolarity. So yeah, the mechanism basically they are asking here. So if you know the mechanism for tolvaptan, you know what it is. Yeah, it can cause it's the answer only. Yeah, if you know what is tolvaptan. It's a vasopressin V2 receptor antagonist. So now you can just tell what is the mechanism of tolvaptan. Okay, I'll just tell the answer here. The answer is it's like it increases the free water clearance. It's a vasopressin as I told you. So yeah, it's a tolvaptan is a vasopressin, that to V2 receptor antagonist, and it increases the free water clearance, which causes dehydration. Hence, the patient may come with you with all that symptoms, like we have dry mouth and increased thirst, because there will be water clearance will be more in this condition. So yeah, tolvaptan is used to delay the disease progression in patients with ADP-KD. Next we move on. Next question we have is, after how many days of primary infestation with the scabies might a person likely to develop pruritus? It's a 7 days, 28 days, 14 days or 3 days. Yeah, it's a simple one if you can know the incubation period of scabies. So I'll just repeat. After how many days of primary infestation with the scabies might a person is likely to develop pruritus? Pruritus is really itching, you know. Its options are 7 days, 28 days, 14 days and 3 days. So yeah, anyone wants to answer this? The incubation period they are asking basically of scabies is what? Okay, I'll just tell the answer here. The answer there is, yeah, it's they are asking the incubation period, and the incubation period is 28 days, that is 3 to 4 weeks. And yeah, if there is a reinfection in case of scabies, it will be like provoke immediate symptoms will be there. So there is no incubation period for reinfection, but yeah, in general it is 3 to 4 weeks. Next we have it's a 24-year-old woman who comes to you with a chronic bloody diarrhea. So yeah, 28 weeks was the right answer. 28 days, sorry, it's 3 to 4 weeks, 28 days. Yeah, now then we have a 24-year-old woman who presents with chronic bloody diarrhea and abdominal pain. A barium enema was done and is shown below. What is the likely diagnosis? See, I can just tell you what it is. What they have done a barium enema, and that barium enema, yeah, it's a very diagnostic feature. So there is a lead pipe appearance, yeah. So just think, whenever you have a lead pipe appearance in barium enema, so what is the condition? And the patient's complaints of chronic bloody diarrhea with abdominal pain, and the options are ulcerative colitis, TB, Crohn's, and the sigmoid volvulus. So yeah, it's a lead pipe appearance is very diagnostic feature of a condition. I'll just repeat the options. It's ulcerative colitis, TB, Crohn's, and sigmoid volvulus. So yeah, if you can answer this. Okay, the answer is very simple. The answer is ulcerative colitis. So you see a lead pipe appearance in only one condition, that too in barium enema. You see a lead pipe appearance, that too in ulcerative colitis. So it is diffusely involves the mucosa, submucosa of the colon, you know, and complete loss of hostile marking in the disease section of the colon, and the organs appear smooth walled and cylindrical. So yeah, that ulcerative colitis is the right answer. Next we have, all of the following are major diagnostic criteria for allergic fungal sinusitis except. I repeat, all of the following are the major diagnostic criteria for allergic fungal sinusitis except. Options are presence of nasal polyps, eosinophilic mucin without invasion, characteristic CT findings, or it's a positive fungal culture. I repeat, all of the following are major diagnostic criteria except presence of nasal polyp, eosinophilic mucin without invasion, characteristic CT findings, or the last option, positive fungal culture. So yeah, if you can just tell this answer. Anyone wants to answer this? Okay, I will only tell. It's basically, see, in case of allergic fungal sinusitis, there are major criteria and minor criteria. So yeah, the D is the right answer, that is a positive fungal culture, but it is a minor criteria. So the question was, all of the following are a major diagnostic criteria except. So it is exception is a positive fungal culture, which is a minor criteria. And major criteria we have like presence of nasal polyp will be there, eosinophilic mucin will be there, that too without invasion, and CT findings, it is also major criteria. So yeah, I'll just tell the major ones. It's a type 1 hypersensitivity, nasal polyposis, CT findings, eosinophilic mucin without invasion, and positive fungal stain. And minor we have asthma, unilateral disease, bone erosion, fungal culture, and serum eosinophilia, all that. So yeah, moving on to the next question we have, which among the following best describes sepsis? So yeah, they have given the scoring system. If you know the scoring system for sepsis, you can just answer this. So which among the following best describes sepsis? Options are suspected or documented infection with SIRS score greater than equal to 2, or it's a suspected or documented infection with SOFA, SOFA score greater than equal to 2, or it's a Q so far greater than equal to 1, or it's a LODS so far greater than equal to 1. So if you know the scoring system for sepsis, then only you can just tell. Otherwise, you won't be able to tell. So yeah, anyone wants to answer? Sepsis, you know, it's basically it's an infection of the whole body. The major CRP will be very high. So yeah. Okay, the answer, I'll just tell the answer here. The answer is B. That is a suspected or documented infection with SOFA, that is SOFA, greater than equal to 2 is best described sepsis. So yeah, among the given options, and sepsis, you know, is a life-threatening condition with organ dysfunction due to the all that it is there. So yeah. See, however, the risk of organ dysfunction in a patient with suspected infection can be determined using a SOFA, that is a sequential organ failure assessment, that is SOFA scoring system. So yeah, if there is a SOFA score greater than equal to 2, we can consider it as an organ dysfunction, that is a severe sepsis. So yeah, let's move on. It's next question. Which of the following is not included in the diagnostic criteria of adjustment disorder? So it's a psychiatric question and they are asking for an adjustment disorder. Which of the following is not included in the adjustment disorder? Options are: the onset occurs after 3 months of stressor. The symptoms do not persist if the stressor is removed. The symptoms of distress are clearly in excess of the normal, and both depressive and anxiety symptoms may be present. So I'll repeat which of the following not included in the diagnostic criteria for adjustment disorder. Onset is after 3 months of stressor. Symptoms do not persist if the stressor is removed. Symptoms of stressor are clearly in excess of the normal, or the both depressive and anxiety symptoms may be present. So yeah, so I think it's very common. It's not 3 months, it's 6 months, I think. Yeah, it's a 6 months. I am right. So yeah, the onset of symptoms should be greater than 6 months. Especially after 6 months of the stressor. You know, it will not last more than 6 months of the stressor. So yeah, it is not included in the diagnostic criteria. So the criteria which they have included is the symptoms do not persist if the stressor is removed, and the symptoms of the distress are clearly in excess of the normal. Both depressive and anxiety symptoms may be present. So yeah. So development of emotional or behavioral response within 3 months of the onset of the stressor. I was wrong. Basically, it's not 6 months. It is within 3 months, but it is not included in the diagnostic criteria. Next, we have what is the method of choice for diagnosis of Kala-Azar. So in case of a Kala-Azar, what is the method of choice? So it's a very easy question. The question is, what is the method of choice for diagnosis of Kala-Azar? Options are rapid dipstick test, it's the aldehyde test of Napier, ELISA, or it's an indirect fluorescent antibody test. So it's a Kala-Azar. They are just asking what is the investigation of choice. I'll just repeat, it's a rapid dipstick test, aldehyde test of Napier, it's a ELISA, or it's an indirect fluorescent antibody test. So yeah, anyone if you want to answer this, investigation of choice for Kala-Azar. So I'll just tell the answer is it's A, that is a rapid dipstick is an investigation of choice for Kala-Azar. So yeah, moving on to the next question. We have a young man who comes to the casualty with a pain over his hand. So he hurriedly mentions that he punched the wall in an anger outburst. So a radiograph of his hand is shown below. Which of the following is false about this injury? So basically it's I'll just tell what it is. Yeah, it's a Bosser's fracture. Bosser's fracture, you know, it's an articular fracture. So basically we are discussing that we have a question which describes a Bosser fracture, and it's a case of a Bosser fracture that to 5th metacarpal neck, you know that, and it's a extra-articular fracture. So yeah, the question was, it's a young man who comes to the casualty with a pain over his hand, and he has basically punched, and it's a Bosser's fracture. So radiograph we are given below. What is the false about this injury? So basically they are asking what is false about the Bosser's fracture. So first, it is MCP joints are kept in full flexion for safe immobilization. It's the strength of the grip is significantly affected. It's an interarticular fracture and cast is applied in the GM position. No, it's not an interarticular fracture. If you have a Bosser's fracture, it's an extra-articular fracture. So yeah, that we have to remember. So, and the other points are very much right. That is, MCP joints are kept in full flexion for safe immobilization in this case because it's a fifth metacarpal neck points, and the strength of the grip is significantly affected because it's a fracture of the hand, and cast is applied in James position. That is also very right. So yeah, in the James position, that is this position of safe immobilization for the metacarpal fractures. Next we have the last question for today. It's a 36-year-old male who was brought to the emergency department after suffering a head injury in an RTA. So a CT revealed a skull base fracture. So the fracture line extended along the apex of the petrous bone involving the Doralus canal. So which of the following kidney nerve is susceptible to the injury? It's a vestibulocochlear, abducens, glossopharyngeal, or it's a cochlear. So it's an emergency question, emergency medicine. So I'll just repeat, it's a 36-year-old male patient comes to the emergency department, suffered a head injury in an RTA. So CT revealed skull base fracture is there. The fracture line extends along the apex of the petrous bone. You have to remember the anatomy in this case. This is the petrous, that is the fracture line extends along the apex of the petrous bone involving the Doralus canal. So which of the following kidney nerve is susceptible to injury? Is the vestibulocochlear, abducens, glossopharyngeal, or it's a cochlear nerve? So yeah. So you have to just tell what's in Doralus canal. So in Doralus canal is basically it's an anatomical location in the skull bone, and it is basically at the petrous apex of the temporal bone, and is formed by the lobus ligament. So yeah, which nerve is injured here? The nerve injured here is B, that is the abducens nerve. You have to remember it forms the content of the Doralus canal, and it is susceptible for injury in this case. So yeah, we have completed the MCQs here. So yeah, thank you so much for joining, and good night.